action and watched anxiously while nothing you planned happened? I do it all the time. I make a plan. I say, this is how it's going to go. I'm a planner. Plan stuff out. This is the way it's going to go. This is how it's going to go. And then when it don't work, I'm devastated. I just don't like it. I like everything to be at a certain way. We have all experienced the wonder of God's plans. And we've all watched him provide for our needs time and time again. When it seems as though there was no way it could be done. Let today's lesson about God's provision for Elijah be an encouragement to you that God will provide. When we meet Elijah for the first time, he's on the way to Ahab to deliver God's message of divine judgment. He's going to Ahab. He's telling Ahab, you're wrong. We just already know he's a wicked king. We don't need to say much about Ahab. He's just very wicked. Worse than Solomon, worse than all the other. And he's telling him, because of your sin, because, it's almost like the Lord said, I have came to you and came to you and came to you. We've had king after king after king after king. You've promised me and promised me and promised me you were going to live for me, and you still won't. So guess what? Now you're cursed. Now I'm going to show you what I mean by what I'm saying. I'm done. I'm done dealing with it. I'm done talking to you about it. Now you're going to see my judgment. So Elijah declares that God was going to stop all rain in Israel for 3.5 years. This would cause a severe drought in the land. That means no water. Because that's where all their water comes from. That's where their well water comes from. That means all their planting, all their food, that's going to stop more than just anything. No rain for 3.5 years is going to be a severe devastation to the land of Israel. Because, they can't take their baths. They can't make their food. They can't, the wells aren't full. The rivers aren't full. The lakes, after 3.5 years, there's no water. So I'm thinking that probably, Ahab probably thought that he was just full of it. Because I don't think he took it for, I think if he would have probably took it for what Elijah said, he would have probably repented and changed his ways, but he didn't. We're not told anything about Elijah's background or family, only that he burst into the scene boldly proclaiming God's warning and judgment. Immediately, God directed Elijah to go to the brook Cherith and to dwell there. God promised Elijah that he would take care of his physical needs while he lived by the brook. This is where I want us to understand some things, because a lot of times we hear from the Lord, and this is where it helps me. We hear from the Lord, we stand for the Lord, we stand in the same place, but things don't always go the way it's planned. The plan of the Lord sometimes changes, not in his plan, but in the way he directs us, and sometimes it just leaves us wondering what in the world happened. So this is where I want to dig in at. He promised to sustain him. He would drink from the brook of Cherith, and that the ravens would feed him. Every morning the ravens came and brought him fresh bread, and every evening they returned with fresh bread and meat for supper. But the thing that we notice is he didn't eat gourmet meals. He didn't live the high life. I have a lot of people say, well, you just got to claim it. You got to claim that Lexus in your garage. You got to claim that big fat bank account. God don't work that way. He does not work that way. You know why? Because we would be a bunch of spoiled brats. How come we don't give our kids everything they ever ask for? Because they'd be spoiled. And exactly why. How come we don't? We don't deserve all that stuff. I want to stay humble and meek before the Lord. And this is exactly the story that helps us to be that way. A humble servant dependent on God. If he wasn't, and why wouldn't he want Elijah to do that? Because you have to remember Solomon, he gave Solomon everything. And what happened to Solomon? This is right in the same line of what just happened. He gave it to the servants, and look what happened. They got the high head, and they got, it all went to them, and look how many wives they had, and look how many, they went to pagan worship and all that. So God kept Elijah humble before him. God said he would supply our needs, but he did not promise he would give us our wants. He will supply what we need for him, not he would give us everything we want. But then the Bible says that the brook dried up. So I want us to think about when the Bible says he told Elijah, go down to the brook, I'm going to sustain you. So Elijah went down to the brook. He waited on the ravens every day, bringing the bread, And I thought about it, as I sat there at my desk, I thought it was kind of neat. I wonder if he had kind of a relationship with, with the birds, with the ravens. They bring him every day. They came. Every night they came, just enough. I know they didn't bring him more than he needed because it would have spoiled. We know in the Word that, they never brought more than they needed because in other stories they spoiled. The bread spoiled. But the righteous man is suffering from the effects of the judgment and sin of the unrighteous people because of the drought. Do you think Elijah in his mind questioned, wait a minute. God told me to go and tell him. Then he told me to go to the brook. I go to the brook, then the brook dries up. How in the world am I going to get any water? I'm not unrighteous. I've done what I should. Have you ever thought, am I just not living for God? Am I just not a decent enough Christian? What's wrong with me? Am I doing something wrong? I'm sure that probably went through Elijah's head because he's just as flesh as we are. Okay, what did I do wrong? Lord, what did I do wrong? Now my brook's dried up. I haven't done nothing wrong. You're going to let all the things from the unrighteous people happen to me? You got to think of it. So, still he knew what God promised him, but he had experienced God's provision. Sometimes we feel the effects of sin's consequences even when we're living for God. We do suffer sickness and death. We do feel financial strain because of evil men. We do hurt. We do suffer pain. But if we're not careful, we'll begin to doubt and distrust God. We will accuse him of being unfair. Remember, don't forget that his promise of provision does not change. Only his method may change. He always promises provision, but he may change the method of promising it. He's changed my method of promising it many a times. And everybody will look and say, oh, well, Sister Myers, she must not be living for God, because if she was living for God, this wouldn't be happening to her. If she was living for God, she wouldn't be going through that. But it's just a time to see if we trust him. So now we're back to where his brook dried up. So what happens? Verse 9 says that the Lord spoke to Elijah and said, arise, go to Zarephath, which belongeth to Zidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow woman there to sustain thee. So he arose and went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, behold, the widow woman was there gathering sticks. He called and told her to fetch water for him. But I want you to think of what's going through Elijah's mind. He just left the brook. The brook dried up. He's walking down the road and he's thinking to himself, the Lord's got something better for me. He's going to bless me for what I've done. He's going to bless me with an abundance because I've been faithful. And so I'm going, he's going to help me. But Zarephath was pagan territory. It was inhabited by Baal worshipers, and there he was going to find a widow woman. First of all, Elijah thought, a woman? what a shock for him to say, a woman. He's going to send me a woman to sustain me. The women of Israel were not rich and independent. Maybe she had unusual circumstances. Maybe she had a wealthy husband who had provided a home and plenty of supplies. But then he thought, okay, a widow woman? It's bad enough she was a woman, but she's a widow woman. Widows can't survive on their own. They needed help from others to survive. How could a widow woman sustain me? And a poor widow woman with a son? Imagine what's going through Elijah's mind. But he knew God was the provider, and he knew God was going to take care of him. So as he's walking, he calls out to her and he says, woman, give me a glass of water. But what I want to explain to you here, though he went into a pagan territory, this widow woman had been praying to God too for a miracle. She had already prepared to take that last cake and die. She had already spoke to her son. The Bible said that she had already told her son that they were going to die. So she was living for God herself. So he calls out to her and he says, I kind of chuckled when I was reading this, woman, get me a glass of water. So when he arrived and he found her out in the yard gathering sticks, Elijah called out and he asked her for a drink. She willingly went on her way to get him a drink, and then he called out to her and he asked her for a morsel of bread. A morsel of bread is a piece, a bite, a mouthful, just a small piece. Elijah was not being unreasonable. He only asked for a small piece of bread. The widow turned to him, and when she spoke, all visions that Elijah had of her wealth vanished. Completely vanished when she said, I have no bread. She told him that all she had was a handful of meal and a little oil. She explained that she was gathering sticks to make a cake for her and her son, and then she had already knew what was going to happen. They were going to die of starvation. Imagine what Elijah was thinking. Lord, are you sure that you sent me to the right place? Can you imagine? Think about what Elijah was thinking. Exactly. Can you imagine? Look carefully at the woman God chose, though. He didn't choose someone with a lot. He deliberately chose someone who had very little. God does not operate the way we do. When we are in need, we immediately look for the rich, and we think that it will help us through our crisis. And on the same token, we excuse ourselves from helping provide for the need because we say, oh, but we don't have much. We only have very little. We don't want to obey God because we say, I don't have much to give. God takes what is little to us, and he's willing for us to give it to him. He makes it more than enough. The need is more than enough for God. Elijah told the widow woman to go and make a cake, but not for her son or herself, but for him first. What audacity for him to do that. I mean, you're thinking to yourself, remembering all the story behind here. Why would a man do that to just a poor widow woman? Ask her. She had nothing. One handful of meal, one little bit of cruse of oil. Is this man really going to take the widow's last bit of meal and oil for himself? But I also want you to think of the woman, how willing she was to give to Elijah. And while I was in my study, I was reading commentary about the widow woman. She doesn't have a name. Nobody ever gave her a name, just the widow woman. And even in some commentary, it says the poor little widow woman. So it makes me think that she was just small, built little widow woman. Her husband didn't leave her well off like Elijah was thinking he might have. So she was a poor little widow woman, just her and her son, praying to God for a miracle herself. And at the last moment, that was the last speck of what she had, the last bit, she was willing to give it up for someone who, she didn't know Elijah. She had never met him before. So she's out gathering the sticks, and she may have said, Lord, you know what? I still trust you to the end. I still trust you to the last second. I'm gathering these sticks, and you know what, Lord? I love you to the very end. I will serve you to the very end. And me and my son are going to die after this last cake, and I'm gathering these sticks for this last cake. And as she's bending down, she hears, woman, go get me a drink. So she does. She obeys, goes, gets him a drink. Then he says, can I have a morsel of bread? Can you imagine what she's thinking? A morsel of bread? Seriously? You want a morsel of bread? I don't even have enough bread for me and my son, and you want a morsel of bread? And then to think that he asked her to make it for him and her son, and her just sitting there while she's making it for them first. Think about her heart for God. She believed him to the very last second. What a woman of God she was. Never had a name. It doesn't seem fair in our human mind and nature, but God doesn't ask for everything we have. But God does ask for everything we have. He demands it all. We are so hypocritical in this matter. When people have an abundance, they are so greedy, they won't hardly part with anything for God or anyone else. Then, when people have very little, they also refuse to give. We tell ourselves God doesn't expect us to give our last bit. But this is a vital part of God's plan for provision. We must give him all first. Until you are willing to seek first the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness, all these things will not be added unto you. God allowed you to have it to see if you're faithful to obey him and give. Stop making excuses for your lack of devotion. Stop making excuses for not giving your service to God. Your time, your money, your tithes, your possessions, your energy. Do you really trust God? This was what my commentary was telling me. This didn't come from me. This was what the commentaries were saying. We just trust him when we want something from him. And I said, Lord, you know what? You're right. Because me and Brother Myers has struggled the last little while. Lord knows I'm not talking about us right now. But anyway, I have had to trust him more now than ever. I've been the one had to dump change in the offering plate. I've never had to do that before. But I've had to give him my last bit to prove to him that I will do that. Knowing that I may have needed it when I went home, but I had to do that. Why? Because he wants to test us to see if we're ready to. The widow woman obeyed God by obeying the man of God. She overcame her hesitation and questions and obeyed. She went into the house, started the fire, mixed the little meal and the little oil, and baked the little cake. She took it to the man of God and watched him while he ate, which is what the Bible said. I was like, I would have probably said, could you go back out and gather some more sticks, not just stand here and watch me while I eat my little cake? I can't stand somebody to watch me anyway like that. Could you imagine her faith in him and her son sat there and watched him while he ate the cake? This is where we have to think about it. No lightning flashed from heaven. No lightning flashed across the sky. No thunder rolled from heaven. There was no visible sign of a supernatural activity. She turned and went back into the house, walked by the barrel, Much to her surprise, there was a little more meal. She quickly looked into the cruse, looked to see if there was enough, and sure enough, there was a little bit of oil. God had provided just as he said he would. Every time she needed a cake, there was just enough. God provided for them throughout the entire drought. And we learned in the beginning of the lesson, the drought was 3.5 years. So for 3.5 years, she went past that barrel and there was just enough. For 3.5 years, she turned and looked on the shelf and there was just enough oil. For the entire drought, there was just enough. God provided just enough for 3.5 years of that drought. Now, Israel was going through the curse from not obeying God, but she didn't go through that. God gave her and her son just enough for being obedient to the man of God. Just enough, not in abundance. We talked about how when Elijah was by the brook, and the ravens came and fed him, he didn't eat gourmet meals. In the morning he ate bread. In the evening they brought him bread and meat. He didn't eat gourmet meals. We don't always get everything we want. We have just enough. So, I'm trying to hurry here. God's request may seem unreasonable, but his provision more than made up for it. When the widow obeyed, not only did she preserve Elijah, she also preserved her own life and her son's. When she needed something more than oil and meal, God provided that also. In the next few verses, we read the tragic death of her son. She took him to Elijah and cried out to God for his life to come again, and the boy was revived. If the widow had not obeyed God in the matter of the meal and oil, she would have missed out the mighty miracles. Though we may suffer times of lack and difficulties, God is faithful. If we obey his commands and seek him first, he will supply all our needs according to his riches and glory. But the problem is, he puts the need before us first to see if we're willing to obey him. That's the part, that's the test. A lot of times we're given something to see if we're willing to give, because he owns everything. It's not only given to us to see, to use, to buy in abundance. We talked about being content not too long ago, last month sometime, being content with what we have. It's not for us to go buy, a brand new car, or for us to go buy a brand new house, or for us to go buy abundance, jewels, and this and that. It's for us to bless people and to help people. That's why God gives to us. Or he can take it away just as quick as he gave. We've learned that in the curses of the people of God. So my illustration, I'm trying to close because I'm trying to give plenty of time and transition, but it says, when I was in Bible school, I heard Brother Leroy Hay tell a story. When he and his wife were newly married, they attended Bible school. They lived in a small cottage where they were responsible for their own expenses. But because of the full class schedule, Brother Haywood was not able to work a job. Friends and family would try to send them small donations to help out. During one particular difficult time, they received no money from any source and gradually ate everything in the house. Finally, one day, Sister Hay, told her husband that she had used the last potato in the bag for their supper. They prayed for God's blessing and shared the last potato. The next morning, Sister Hay noticed there was another potato in the bag. They shared that one for lunch. The evening, there was another one. And so forth, for that number of days, there was one potato in the bag each meal for several days until money came in the mail from someone for them to buy groceries. One more potato every day. God will supply somehow. I'm living proof. When I read that, I was living proof. I've said, I had tears about run down from my eye. I said, Lord, we've done stuff like that before, knowing that you have got, that's, you know that that's it. But you know that God's going to provide somehow. You know that there's some way that God's going to make a way, but sometimes it makes you feel like, this is the part I wanted to expound on, it makes you feel like God doesn't love you or that you're being punished. And that's the part that I wanted to talk about real quick here at the end, because I felt that way before. When we go through struggles in life and we go through times of drought in our life, we feel like the Lord has forsaken us. He's not forsaken us. It's a test of our faith and a test of our time. Plus, the other thing the Lord showed me during this is when we go through drought, sometimes it's because, just like in the lesson, we go through drought because of someone else's unrighteousness or unfaithfulness. A lot of the reason why we go through drought is because someone else is not obeying the Lord. That's why Elijah sat by the brook of Cherith and the brook dried up. Elijah didn't do anything wrong. The brook dried up because of the unrighteous people. But there was no water for Elijah because the brook dried up because of the unrighteous people, and it rained down on Elijah. It came down the line, and Elijah suffered also because the people weren't doing what they were supposed to do. But God didn't leave him there very long, but he probably suffered that anguish because he dealt with just the same as we do, the devil fighting us. You might as well give up. God done forsaken you. Look how many years you've served him, and you're going to sit here and die of starvation, and this is your last bit of meal, your last cruise, and you and your son's going to die, and look how long you've served the Lord. Or God sent you to Israel to tell them that they were going to die of drought, and now you're going to sit here by the brook of Cherith, and you're going to die too, and look what kind of prophet you are. That's exactly how the devil works on our minds. But you know what? I thought to myself and made up my mind this week. I said, you know what? We all have New Year's goals or things we'd like to do for the new year. And I said, you know what? I'm going to trust him if I die of starvation. I'm going to trust him if I die at the brook and it dries up. I'm going to trust him no matter what. Because if it's at the last second and I'm standing out there at the chicken saying, go ahead and lay, I'm ready for that egg. He gave me 3 chickens, didn't he? We got to work on that. We got to pray because they're only laying 2 eggs. We need 3. They've only been laying 2. We got to have 3 eggs a day. But anyway, let's continue to pray and trust in the Lord. Because you know what? God gives for a reason. And it ain't all about just money. It's our time. It's our efforts. Why are we laying up treasures here? There's nothing here for us. We're laying up things here. There's nothing here for us. We're not staying here. If we're so comfortable with laying up treasures here, maybe the Lord needs to just leave us here. You ever thought about that? If we're so comfortable with staying here, maybe that's where he needs to leave us at. Is here to live through tribulation and learn that there's more to life than just earthly things. So let's make our New Year's time of living for the Lord and searching for his will and doing his will. Living more for him, being more sensitive to giving for him, our time, our efforts, our prayer time, our study time, our uplifting each other. I mean, we all need to be uplifted in time of uplifting. And so let's do that. Pastor, you going to change the order of service? I'm done now.